Working in confined spaces can be more hazardous than regular workspaces due to its internal configuration. A number of workers are injured or killed each year while working in confined spaces. At JSW, a confined space entry standard has been prepared as an aid to employers, employees and all stakeholders in order to protect them against the hazards associated with confined space entry and to effectively control the risks associated with working inside confined spaces. The purpose of this training video is to make you familiar about the confined space standards and safety precautions that need to be followed while entering and working in confined spaces. What is a confined space? A confined space is an area large enough and so configured that anyone can bodily enter and perform assigned work, has restricted means of entry and exit, and it is not designed for continuous human occupancy. Confined spaces are classified into two types: permit required confined space and a non-permit required confined space. A permit required confined space is one that meets the definition of a confined space and has one or more of these characteristics. First, it contains or has the potential to contain a hazardous atmosphere. Second, it contains a material that has the potential to engulf an entrant. Third, it has a dangerous internal configuration or design. Or four, it contains any other recognized serious safety or health hazards. Some examples of permit required for confined space are air handling units, boilers, chambers, chimneys, sewers, ETP water collection tanks, furnaces, HVAC ducts, excavations more than 1.8 meter in depth, silos, bunkers, etc., gas holders, gas line networks, dust catcher. A non-permit required confined space means a confined space that does not contain atmospheric hazards or have the potential to contain any hazard capable of causing death or serious physical harm. Such confined spaces should also be monitored regularly to determine if conditions within the space changes. Hazards in a confined space. Confined spaces may be extremely hazardous because of the lack of natural air movement and due to their specific design and configuration resulting in oxygen deficient, oxygen enriched, flammable or toxic atmospheres. Loose granular materials such as sand or coal or cement or lime powder stored in bins and hoppers can engulf and suffocate a person entering such a confined space. Internal configuration or design that might cause an entrant to be trapped or asphyxiated, such as inwardly converging walls or by a floor that slopes downward and tapers to a smaller cross-section. Safety or health hazards such as amplification of noise, static electricity, poor illumination, etc. Slippery surfaces inside the confined space. Principles of confined space entry. Managing and controlling confined space hazards appropriately will ensure a safe workplace. Each plant should have a written confined space entry program that applies the principles of confined space entry standard. Confined spaces shall only be entered if no other approach to task completion is practical. When a confined space entry is essential, you should ensure that potential hazards in the space are eliminated before and during entry. Make sure that procedures to eliminate, control, or isolate the hazards faced prior to and during entry are developed. Prepare the confined space for entry. Monitor the space atmosphere before and during entry. Maintain safe entry conditions. Know about the potential hazards the activity within the confined space could create. Be aware of the potential effects of the activities outside the space on the conditions within the space. Be aware of the falling objects or fall from height or fall into the openings inside the confined space. Clear and proper communication between entrants, attendants, and rescue personnel should be maintained during the operation. In order to perform tasks safely inside, a permit is required for confined space. Make sure to have an appropriate confined space entry permit in place. The entry permit. A confined space entry permit is a form that provides written authorization to carry out any activity inside a permit-required confined space. A permit form details the purpose of the entry and the scope of work to be performed inside. It also lists the date, time, and duration of the entry, name of the entry team members, potential hazards present in space, measures to control the hazards, required PPE, ventilation, and work equipment, results of the initial atmospheric tests, rescue services to be summoned if needed, such as equipment to use and phone numbers to call. Preparation for entry. Place warning signs and barriers at the entrance around the confined space entry point to protect those on the outside and inside the space. Isolate all external energy sources, pipelines, or equipment used to transport materials into the space and lock or tag them appropriately. Mechanically and electrically disconnect power-driven equipment from source. Maintain the positive isolation. Remove chemical and atmospheric hazards from the confined space. Never improve the air quality in the confined space by adding oxygen to the atmosphere. Make sure low voltage lights such as 24 volts or less and intrinsically safe lighting are available. Use tools that are double insulated and make sure proper grounding is done to eliminate shock hazard from static electricity. Use of earth leakage circuit breakers or ELCBs on electrical connection of tools is recommended. The portable appliance should be connected with 30 MA ELCB. Depending on the work and the circumstances of the confined space, PPE such as respirators, self-contained breathing apparatuses, SCBA, a body harness with an attached lifeline should be used. Although lifeline should be used by all the entrants entering the confined spaces, it is highly recommended in larger confined spaces such as boiler where free movement is necessary. In this case, the entry supervisor will make the appropriate decision. Atmospheric testing. When it comes to atmospheric hazards, we are basically looking for three main dangers: unsafe oxygen levels, flammable gases, and toxic vapors. Every confined space must be appropriately tested for the atmospheric hazards with specialized equipment and the procedures. The atmosphere in a confined space should be monitored before and during entry. Instruments used for measuring atmospheric concentrations in confined spaces should have current calibrations. These instruments should be verified on a known source before and after each use. The atmospheric testing should be performed in a specific order. The test for oxygen levels is always the first step in any atmospheric protocol. The oxygen level should not be deficient and enriched. Using gas monitor probes or hoses, test the air at the ceiling, middle and bottom of the confined space. Ensure the oxygen level is between 19.5% and 23.5%. The proper atmospheric testing of the space determines whether respirators or self-contained breathing apparatuses will be needed, or if a typical ventilation protocol will be adequate. Second, flammable gases through the space, covering horizontal areas as well as vertical. This is necessary because even small pockets of flammable gases in air can ignite, leading to severe damages. Flammable or combustible gases create a threat of fire or explosion. These gases are often odorless and invisible, and if the concentration of a flammable gas is high enough, even a tiny spark of static electricity can cause a catastrophic explosion. This should be below the threshold limit value. The concentration should not be more than 5% of lower flammability limit. If concentration varies during course of activities, check the positive isolations and lower the concentration to 0%. As with flammable gases, toxic gases and vapors are often invisible and odorless. Common toxic vapors are methyl hydrogen sulfide, nitrogen and carbon monoxide. A few inhalations of any of these dangerous gases could kill you. Third, toxic vapors. If testing reveals oxygen deficiency or the pressure of toxic gases or vapors, the space must be ventilated and retested before you enter the space. Continuous and/or periodic monitoring should be conducted within a maximum span of 2 hours or as specified in permit to work system. The concentration of toxic vapors should be below the threshold limit value. Confined space entry. The confined space entry team involves entry supervisors, attendants, entrants, and rescue services personnel. Each of these members have a very specific responsibilities. Once the purpose of entry and scope of work have been identified, isolation of energy sources should be carried out appropriately. The entry supervisor makes sure that all possible controls are applied to prevent personal exposure to potential hazards. He ensures that atmospheric tests are taken by authorized personnel to check for atmospheric hazards in the confined space, and the results of the tests are recorded in the permit, and also verifies that the permit form is filled out completely. After ensuring all safety measures have been taken and the space is safe for entry, he obtains the permit as per the permit to work or PTW standard. The white copy of the entry permit and certificates should be posted at confined space entrance. Prior to entry, the entry supervisor should ensure that the team members know the nature of the work and the potential hazards involved. The entry supervisor or permit holder is authorized to cancel the permit, either because the work is complete or there is a problem. If an entry supervisor or permit holder has any doubts about the hazards in the confined space, the entry will not proceed until the supervisor is sure all hazards are controlled. He also keeps unauthorized individuals away from the confined space area. The maximum duration of the entry permit is 1 shift. An entry permit shall be cancelled if the task scope changes. A new permit with an assessment of the new task shall be issued. A discontinuation of work and restart shall also need issuance of a new permit. Attendants are the trained personnel who remain outside the permit space. The attendant should have an accurate list of the authorized entrants inside the permit space and record their in and out timings in the permit or a register. Entrants are the personnel who go into the confined space and perform the tasks at hand. Before entering any space, entrants should wear all the required PPE. An entrant must maintain contact with the attendant and leave the space immediately whenever the attendant orders an evacuation. Attendant should monitor the entrants' conditions, communicate with them and alert everyone to evacuate if they are in danger. If at any time there is any questionable action or non-movement by the entrant inside, a verbal check should be made by the attendant. If the entrant gives no response, the attendant should attempt to remove the disabled entrant by a lifeline without entering the space or immediately inform rescue services. If anyone enters the permit area without authorization, the attendant should inform both entrant and the entry supervisor. Attendant should remain outside the space unless relieved by an authorized attendant and should also know the access to the closest telephone, safety shower, exits, alarm boxes and other emergency equipment. After completing the task inside the confined space, the entrants should clean the work area and remove all tools before leaving the place. A rescue team comprising the highly trained response personnel should be available in the event of an emergency that may occur during the entry operation. Rescue team members should also be trained in first aid and cardiopulmonary resuscitation or CPR. Before the team could perform any rescue operation, they must be made aware of the risks and hazards of the space, appropriate rescue plans and the essential resources including the required PPE to be used while performing the rescue. The rescue team must remain within such distance from the confined space so that they can respond to emergency in a timely manner. Good planning and preparation can greatly reduce the time needed to rescue a fellow worker in crisis. Any work performed inside a confined space should be carried out safely. Wear all necessary PPE and follow the safe work procedures as instructed. If you have any questions, consult with your supervisor. Safety is everyone's responsibility. Keep yourself and others safe.